Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to this session late in the day. I really appreciate it. We've been asked to remind everybody about how feedback works this year. You may have heard it already, but just to reiterate, it's obviously really important for Develop going forward to make sure that these sessions are informative and have the right content for developers. So provided you've signed into the session, you should get an email sent during it. And if you could have a look at that and leave your honest feedback, I'd really appreciate it. Okay. I'm Gemma Foster. I'm from Dlala Studios, which is based in Whittam in Essex, which is about 40 minutes outside of London. Some of you may have met or watched talks given by my boss. He's the big hairy guy sitting at the front over there, AJ Grand-Scrutton, quite famous for swearing a lot and inappropriate slides in his deck. If you've come here for that, you won't get too much of it from me. Right, let's go. What is a producer? I think it's a question that even producers ask themselves on a regular basis. I know that whenever I meet people and they ask what I do, they say, what the hell does that mean? If you ask Google Images come up with this. Lots of smiley, happy people, very enthusiastic. I'm quite surprised that when you type in game producer, you don't see this. In the time that I've been in this industry, that's definitely more akin to what I've experienced. I quite often feel like my head is on fire. And then obviously we've got kind of different layers and hierarchy within production. And, you know, in a lot of big studios, AAA games, you might have all of those layers. But I've also spoken to some big ones where they kind of have an exec producer, a producer, and then some assistants. But you get the picture. There's lots and lots of variations everywhere you go. And each one of those roles is going to mean something completely different. But the purpose of the production team, whether it's a one-man band or a six-man band, is effectively exactly the same thing. If we look at some kind of more detailed definitions, you've obviously got Wikipedia's version of events there, which is always a little bit light and a bit fluffy, doesn't really tell us too much. The one that's on the top left is from like a careers website, gives us a little bit more insight, tells us that we're a bit like this and a bit like this, book editors, film producers, product managers. But the one I find to be most true to life is one from an actual producer, Brian Treadwell, who said that the basic version of what a producer does is get stuff done. By far the most fluffy, but absolutely the most true to life. So, based on this, you know, what qualifications and skills are required for the role? Well, if you look it up, these are actually things that are taken from sort of current advertisements out there for producer jobs. Obviously, there's a bit more detail in terms of the day-to-day running of what goes on, but these are the things that are there as the core of the qualifications and skills required. Experience in the video game industry is essential. Project management experience, at least 1 year, is often quoted, which I think is quite interesting. Team management experience is desirable. A bachelor's degree in the relevant subject or equivalent in industry experience, and a video games fanatic. Nothing there really surprising, I don't think, other than perhaps the 1 year, but that's basically the gist of it. But if we look really beyond what we know sort of top level and get stuff done, what does the role actually require? And these are some of the biggest challenges I think that we're up against. So core beliefs and preconceptions. Don't know if anybody here is familiar with the concept of CBT and cognitive behavioural therapy, things like that. It's not rocket science. Basically, from our own personal experience, we all develop these core beliefs and kind of rules and assumptions about people in specific roles, experiences we've had, and I definitely found that to be true for production right from the start. And some examples of what these are is, you know, lack of understanding. There's nothing more frustrating for people who are experts in a particular field, who know their job inside out, to have somebody saying, oh, well, you know, you've only got to add this on. It can't take that long to do that, can it? And actually, that's incredibly frustrating and demoralising. Crunch, obviously, is a biggie. Everybody's been through this at some point, I'm sure. Massive amounts of work, short periods of time. It's not great for anyone's morale, and it's not going to be great for the game. Scope creep, something else I'm sure everyone's experienced. You know, part of the production role is really to make sure that that doesn't go too far. You know, you've got to keep your creative director in check, you've got to keep your clients in check and try and keep that where it should have been and where everybody expected it to be. No negotiation. So coming in and just barking orders at people, this is what you've got to do and this is the time you've got to do it. No kind of two-way discussion and communication with people about what the requirements are and what people actually need in order to get the job done. Poor budget management is basically self-explanatory. If you run out of money, the game's not shipping. And potentially you could really, really cause problems for your specific departments as well, because they could be expecting to upscale at certain points and so on. If you've not distributed things correctly, that's going to cause problems too. And then we've got the kind of last two, which are very much the kind of, everybody thinks about this a lot with time-wasting meetings and the tedious administration that tends to come with production and gets imposed upon everybody as well. Nobody likes that. So these are the kind of things that people automatically think when it's like, oh, he's the producer, oh, we're having a meeting with the producer, you know, these sorts of things. And the other big battle that we have is the kind of bridging the gap between design and tech. I mean, this is a difficult one, and understandably so in some respects, because the main objective that the teams are trying to achieve is completely different. You've got designers going to be focused on making sure the game is fun. That's what they're all about. And then you've got tech, which are obviously about performance, scalability, and maintenance. And consequently, they work in really different ways. So you've got, you know, design is going to be far more organic and imaginative, and they all work together. And tech, the very nature of what they do, means they have to be really structured and systematic and much more isolated in what they do. I don't know if everyone has ever seen this, but there's a talk that Brian Schwab did, a GDC Talk 2014, all based on this. It's really, really good. If you get a chance, you should check it out, because he's got extensive experience across both ways and can really give some good pointers about bridging that gap far more than I could. But from a production perspective, we'd be looking at obviously communication, and obviously it's really easy to just kind of put that word up there and say, oh yeah, you have to communicate. It's not actually that easy. You've got the barriers there with vocab, you've got a lack of consistency. A designer says something and already the programmer's mind is running away thinking, oh my God, do they actually mean that? Because if they do, we're going to have to do this, that and everything else. And the other thing you have to be really careful with is kind of direct messaging, you know, instant messaging. Having really important conversations over electronic format is not a good idea, and yet it happens without you even realising. So you need to kind of keep that in check as well. The other way that you do that, of course, is by making sure that there's a really clear picture about accountability, structure and process. But I've added there as well, not too much, because as much as you can draw the lines to make it clear who's responsible for what and when and how that works, at the end of the day, you're doing something that's very, very creative. And that's going to be the most important thing, because at the end, you have to have a great game. So you have to be really, really careful to balance that. On top of those kind of really big overarching challenges, you've got the actual lists of work. And, you know, some of this, I'm not going to lie, is not the most exciting of stuff. You've got a massive group of people. Sometimes they're going to be internal, external, and you're responsible for ultimately coordinating all of those, joining them all up together, making sure they're not arguing, roadblocking each other and so on. And then obviously you've got the kind of production work, the stuff that's not particularly exciting sometimes, but fundamentally important to getting the game launched. And we have issues that feel a little bit, from a production standpoint, like they're outside of your reach. They happen, but you can't always affect whether they could have been prevented or not. So unexpected changes, you know, change management is actually there as one of the main things we should be thinking about. But sometimes we can literally all be acting on best interests and we build things a certain way and something happens along the journey, which means like, we now need to go back and do a lot. Scope creep I spoke about earlier, it's kind of obvious, but also you have to be careful about it happening internally too, because what you'll often find is you'll tell a team like, we're going to be working on this now, and they create that, but they get carried away and they kind of go off on a tangent, and there can be really big implications to that, because, you know, something great that level design does might mean there's a big cost change or resource requirement in animation, or something that art does might make tech go, oh my God, how are we going to do this? So, you know, that's a biggie. Poor performance is something you have to be very aware of. It's something where, you know, ultimately you've got these groups of people, different for every project, and you can't, you know, direct line manage them. Nor could you, because you wouldn't have the expertise, so you wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't be able to look at someone's code and say, oh, that's not good. But you can't manage their behaviours and so on. It's actually in control of someone else. But if it's not good, the effect it can have on a project could be really substantial. So, having considered these things in a little bit more detail, revisiting that kind of like qualifications and skills required, I'm not convinced, really, that that is the be-all and end-all of it. I think that you probably need some other stuff in there somewhere to be able to do all of these things and kind of take initiative with them. And when I joined the game industry, this is basically where I sat, which probably makes everybody think, well, why the hell are you a producer? And why the hell are you even giving a talk here? And that kind of leads us on to what we're getting to, which is basically, what I'd like to do is kind of take you back through my journey and sort of explain a little bit along the way what you pick up, where, and how that kind of helps and transitions into this industry on the business side and the production side. So, my journey. When I was little, all I wanted to do was dance and be a choreographer, and tap dancing specifically. These were my idols, Bojangles, Fred Astaire and Adam Garcia. And this was me, aged 8. This is about 20 minutes before I went on for my first ever tap solo. And I don't have many photos actually of dancing days, which is a blessing, but it's not a great memory actually, because what happened with this is I went on stage, music started, and I didn't move a muscle. Ended off just running off, bawling my eyes out and throwing up everywhere. So yeah, it wasn't successful. But I got over eventually, stage fright, and actually when I was 14 I ended up being the world champion in tap for my age category. So in the end, I was okay. Until, that was the main objective, until this. Now, I don't know if anybody even recognises this or knows where it's from, but it's the dancing hallucination that Ally McBeal sees in the series, Ally McBeal. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it was out, I'm thinking, about 1996, I would have been about 12 at the time, and it was about a group of lawyers who worked for a really bizarre firm who had really strange clients and really weird cases, and it was all drama in the court, and I loved it. And from that moment, that was the plan. It became very much about law, and I'm moving forward with that. Obviously, it works a little bit different, less glamorous in this country, but I was going to be a barrister, then I was going to be a QC, and then I wanted to be a judge. And that was the plan. And once I'd achieved all those things, I'd be very happy. So in order to do that, obviously, you've got to really set about achieving a lot. And those of people that know me will know that I don't do anything by half. So at that point, I decided, okay, it's a very competitive industry. I need to probably go to somewhere like Oxford University, and that's what I'm going to try and do. And so basically, life changed a little bit from dancing, and I had to embrace my sort of inner Amy Farrah Fowler, really hit the books. It didn't come very easy to me, and I had to get involved in lots of extracurricular stuff as well. So I did, school librarian and sports and charity events, organising charity events. I was a member of the student representative for our school sort of governing body, which did great for my sort of street cred. That really helped me out. And I worked from a very young age, and also when we got to college, I was elected the chair of our council. So right from the off, what you're trying to do is, set really high self-expectations. You've got determination. You're developing a real good work ethic very early on, and you're already kind of getting a sense of things like due diligence, things that are quite important that people don't really pay a lot of attention to when you're that kind of age. It wasn't all entirely plain sailing. When I did my GCSEs, I had a stroke in the middle of one of my GCSEs. That wasn't great. And when I did my A-levels, I had this thing called tachycardia, which basically means you just swell up, like the Michelin Man, and that wasn't great either. But while I was actually doing my A-levels, we had some bad stuff happening in my family, which was completely unforeseeable. And as a result, I had to kind of put my life on hold with regards to the university plan. And I've been working at Magnet in Romford, doing kitchen design and lead taking. So they very kindly offered me a job for my gap year. So that's what I did. Eventually, I managed to get to university, decided to go to Kent University and did a double honours degree in law and history. And while I was doing that, it was really hard. Again, it was expensive. We didn't have any money, and the issues I'd had at home, my mum was very ill. I still had to come home every weekend. I had to work 2 jobs while I was doing it. And to be honest with you, in the year that I'd been out of it, I felt like I'd gone on to a whole different thing, and it didn't really feel like it was right for me anymore. So I decided I need to look at something else. So I got a job working for Marks & Spencer's and went on to one of their management programs there. And Marks & Spencer's, notoriously, fantastic company to work for. It's a really good brand, etc. But in relation to working in retail, I don't think I can say it any better than what's on the screen at the moment, which is, it's like riding a bike. The bike's on fire, you're on fire, everything's on fire, and you're in hell. It definitely wasn't for me. I'll never forget the time when, the penny really dropped for me and I was like, I can't do this. And basically I had this man who was just screaming at me at the top of his lungs because we had this offer for buy one, get one free on Swiss rolls, and we only had one left in stock. And I really was just like, wow, I think I need to go back to what I was originally planning. But yeah, in this period, it was challenging. You had to be adaptable, a bit of a Darwin, adapt to survive. But you kind of maintained your work ethic throughout, and you did develop some other skills. So I decided anyway I was going to go back to the law thing and find a different way to achieve it. So I got a job working as a paralegal in the employment law team for Essex County Council. Obviously, employment law is pretty broad, pretty interesting actually. You get to see a lot of very interesting cases, but basically you were really exposed to kind of the obligations of an employer, the obligations of the employee, grievance, performance management, dismissal, and obviously all the things you need to do in order to prep for a tribunal as well. So that was really interesting. And at this time as well, what was happening with local authorities in this country is they were decommissioning their structures and moving them outside. So what they were doing is creating sort of legally freestanding entities that would earn income for the local authority to go back into the public pocket. And with that came opportunities. So we created something called Essex Legal Services. And in turn, what I got all of my qualifications paid for whilst I was working full-time, which was a fantastic opportunity for me. And while I was doing that, the condition was that I moved into the childcare team. So this was the team, I was in there as a caseworker who represents basically social workers who are dealing with child protection matters, the removal of children who are at risk and so on. Obviously really, really rewarding work, very, very eye-opening, obviously not entirely pleasant from times, but really broad as well. You think of it as being one thing, but actually there's a huge amount of legislation that sits behind that. But an opportunity in the kind of supervisor role came up for the civil litigation team. And because I'd been studying for a while by this point, I decided I could probably move into that because it was more sort of in line with what I was planning to do long term. So it gave me some kind of direction towards where I was headed. But obviously in that period, what you've learned is an awful amount of information. And dealing with cases, obviously, you have to be really, really vigilant. And you're supporting other people, they're relying on you all the time. And the third-party instructions here was actually a really, really interesting thing, because this is where you're actively instructing specialists who deal with, the case. You're calling upon them. They're psychologists. They're people who know about the children, the parents, and doctors and so on. So it was a really important time to learn sort of legal drafting and so on to move me into my next role. So civil litigation. This was definitely my biggest learning curve for sure. It is a very broad subject. This is just kind of an idea so you can get a little bit of a backdrop as to what kinds of cases I was dealing with. Predominantly personal injuries, so we had road traffic accidents. There was also defamation cases, so like slander, subsidence cases, occupiers' liability, employers' liability, and everything health and safety that's sat around that. I mean, collectively there you're talking about probably about 15 pieces of core legislation, which have, I don't know how many sections, I can't quote them all, but then you also had the kind of regulations that run alongside those as well, which is quite significant. And in terms of the day-to-day responsibility, well, on a personal level, you had your caseload, you had your case management. And it's very easy to kind of just say that without really understanding exactly what that meant and how much went behind it. So you're responsible for all of those cases, seeing them through from start to finish. You have to obtain all of the evidence based on the claims made, you have to assess them, you have to provide the decisions within the reasonable timescales and within the protocol timescales. Once proceedings are issued, if it gets that far, then it's a whole other load of timescales that you're working to, and you're relying a lot on other people to try and get the information you need to do the job you're trying to do. Report analysis that comes in, settlements, so once, if you have obviously had to accept liability on something, you've then got to do all the analysis on the types of injury, the future losses of employment, the impact it has on their family, all of the assessment, and then obviously legal cost analysis as well. And just to give an idea about the volume of work we're talking about, for a good 2 to 3 years we were working at 800 live files each. And at the time, the Law Society's recommendation was 120. So it's fair to say we were somewhat overworked. And we had other things that we had to pay attention to, like repudiation targets. So we weren't, we were trying to avoid accepting liability on any more than 3% of the claims we received. And obviously much of it is outside of your control, but that's what we were supposed to work against. And if you weren't, then obviously, people would investigate. And chargeable targets, obviously, you had to prove your worth, you had to generate a certain amount of income. Wasn't too challenging for us because we had so much work, and we were working basically 7 days a week at the time anyway. But nevertheless, it was something else that we had to bear in mind all the time. And then CPD, continuous professional development. Obviously, if you're a practitioner in law and you need to maintain your legal registration, you have to do a certain amount of this every single year. But then also on a day-to-day basis, in order to practice in the field you're in, you have to know it well and you have to keep up to date with good case law. So yeah, there was quite a lot of CPD requirement as well. And from a leadership standpoint, I had a team of 12 people who were dealing with all of the things that's in the personal accountability column, and you're ultimately responsible for all of that they're doing too. So their muck-ups are your muck-ups ultimately. You need to make sure that you're managing them in an effective way to ensure that they've got the skills and everything they require to deal with these matters. So you had that, you obviously had performance management aspect, and we were also required to look into the business development, business strategy moving forward, what types of products and services could we provide to other local authorities and so on. We gave commercial training services. So we'd actually have to go and give training to large organisations, highways inspectors, schools, people about compliance with legislation, making sure that they weren't going to result in any really nasty claims that are going to completely bankrupt their services. Policy consultancy and development. So yeah, again, developing actual policies that people have to follow in order to ensure their compliance. And then case management systems. So obviously, as you can see, there's a lot of work and a lot of structure. So it really lends itself quite nicely to having electronic systems to help you with all of this and all of the deadlines and so on. At the time, though, it was pretty early on for legal case management systems, but what you had to do is get very involved in the consultancy to try and get them to work for you, so it made life easier rather than more difficult. And basically from that is what led on to the next thing. So they're all of the different types of things that you're picking up along the way there. And this is a diagram I'm sure lots of people have seen before, sort of a project management kind of visualisation of what is intended from the start and what it turns out to be at the end. And there can be a number of reasons for that, but it really represents what was happening with us at the time, because much like we were talking about earlier with bridging the gap between design and programming, we had the same issue. We had lawyers and programmers. And what was happening is so much was getting lost in translation along the way, and the end result simply wasn't what it needed to be or what people wanted it to be from the start. So there was a kind of call out to say, maybe we should, try and get some lawyers to actually software develop. There wasn't actually that many volunteers, surprisingly, but I was one of the people that said, sure, I'll give that a go. So I went on a course and I learned how to build software in legal case management systems as part of a national incentive to kind of get people all using the same case management applications and using the same kind of process and approach. So that was basically my job title while I was doing that. We weren't really ready for it. We weren't set up well at all. I had one other person that was working with me, and she had been to university and done a law degree but had never practiced law. And then, so basically you were literally doing everything from the project management to designing the actual software. You were the legal consultant on it as well, developing it and QA testing it and rolling it out. So yeah, you had to do a lot of product development, work out where the best quick wins were, what we're going to benefit most from, and had to get really, really good at kind of process mapping, drawing out the way that everything goes and should work and the eventualities in which it might go in a different direction. Because this was a big problem before, is, cases don't tend to go straight down in a line. In fact, that's probably like 1% of the things that actually go the way expected. They go off in all sorts of directions. So the software needs to cater for that, for it to go off in a different direction at any given time without all of the support that sits behind it just simply becoming useless and redundant. So we had to think short-term and long-term. We thought about how, things are now, but knowing full well that things were going to change in the future with regards to, like we all have to deal with, sort of the law changing, the process changing and so on. Obviously, I had to learn to code. And yeah, it was involved with all of the kind of testing, the iteration, piloting it in certain areas before we were actually rolling it out on a full scale. And rollout meant literally absolutely every aspect, so you were actually giving the training to these lawyers. And the legal system and lawyers are still really, really behind the times even now. I mean, it's really archaic, so trying to get people to realise the potential of what they were using was really hard work. And once we had it in, we obviously realised then we could capture all of this information that we had about these cases, because they were electronic files, about the types of claims that we were getting and the business strategy, but also we could help our clients work out where their sort of pressure points were and what they needed to work on going forward. And we obviously had to maintain it and support, and end user support was definitely one of the less exciting parts of this journey for sure. So, after a couple of years of doing that, we managed to release something about 16 applications, I think we got going live, and they all agreed that the scheme was going really, really well and we should carry on with it and even broaden it internationally. But it was one of those things, it was only ever supposed to be a temporary thing for me. And I got to a point where I thought, okay, I'm at a crossroads now. Do I go back to law, or do I try and do some of the stuff that I found interesting about what I've been doing and try and sort of embrace that a bit more, which was more the business improvement stuff, the process stuff, and actually seeing the turnaround and the difference that it made once you'd implemented all these things. So I decided, I'm going to go business improvement, and I joined a company called EES for Schools, which was a company providing school improvement services. So that was basically a range of things that were sort of software-based, they were people services, they were consultancy services, and I was employed as their business improvement and operations manager. So this was the first time that I'd really got involved in sort of real financial analysis and cost analysis, and kind of assessing real sustainability. And, you know, when we got there were an awful lot of products that just weren't financially viable going forward at all. They were actually losing money rather than anything else, so we had to work out what we could reformulate, how could we change things, how could we restructure our teams to make these services work. And these were all of the areas that I was responsible for. So like I say, yeah, there's some software stuff in there. Obviously, HR services, we provided library services for schools. We did training and development, so like conventional sort of classroom teaching for teachers and teaching assistants and so on. And in at least, well, all of those areas had at least one project that I was responsible for in them. So you're essentially moving well into program management by this point, and expanding all of those skills you've got from sort of project management elsewhere. And if you're in the leadership team here, it was a requirement that you were also a school governor. So that was another exciting thing that you had to do while you were doing this job. And then following a couple of sort of successful changes that we've made in the software side with some of these other services, I was asked to move across to a new product that we were developing called School Effectiveness Plus. It was essentially sort of three parts. So we had like consultancy services. These were specialist educators who were going in and speaking to head teachers about the way in which they ran their school and the strategy behind their school improvement. We had an online portal, which was essentially a self-analysis tool, a self-evaluation tool, which was designed to basically highlight all of the sort of little red flags that the school had. And then the development side of things, which was like in-house development at the school, and then programs that they could go to actually fill those gaps and get better moving forward. So yeah, there was a lot more of the same there, as you can see. The big thing was the sort of financial change and actually the operations management side of things. So you were responsible for the sort of BAU day-to-day running of the businesses in all of these services, and then obviously all of the improvement products going forward as well. So it was pretty multidisciplined. And School Effectiveness Plus was really, really successful. It took off really well after we'd done the pilot, and then very soon after won an Education Investors Award for school improvement. So we were really, really pleased with what we'd done there. And then I had a bit of a chance encounter. So basically, AJ, the CEO of Dlala, and myself went to school together, which was quite a long time ago now. And what happened was we were at a mutual friend's wedding, and we started talking about all of the different things that we'd been up to over the past however many years it had been by that point. And this basically is what happened, is AJ said, hey, you should be a game producer. And I was like, okay. And it just so happened that Dlala needed a game producer because at this point they had just signed a deal with Disney Interactive and they knew they were going to need somebody. So after a couple of interviews with the leads at Dlala, I was offered the job and I decided, sure, I'll move into this now. So what were the initial challenges, having come from where I'd been and what I walked into? At project level, I personally had no industry experience, so from the off it felt a little bit like everybody was speaking a different language. We had a $3.5 million project that was already in production and 0 production processes. Nothing was happening at all. No real project costing, there was no specified project budget. We had a demanding client with very high expectations. I mean, we're talking about Disney. We were working on a universally known and loved IP. I find it hard to believe there's probably anybody who wouldn't know this IP. And at a company level, the organisation size was a bit of a shock. I'd always come from these really big organisations with way too much bureaucracy and coming to something very small with literally none. And obviously opposite ends of the scale, neither is particularly good. We had no reality of our costs or company budget, financial processes, we had missing and incomplete HR and legal documentation, no health and safety procedures or compliance, no premises or ops management, and no best value principles. Like, literally, I don't know how the business was surviving. And I mean, a lot of you would be thinking, well, why is this the producer's problem? Well, it all filters down. The problem is everything that's happening at top level affects everything that comes thereafter. So it was kind of hard to ignore and just be able to get on with everything. So that's kind of the backdrop. So the first thing was, okay, we're making a game, methodologies, project management, what do we use? There's all these different methodologies, and obviously anyone here that is a project manager has probably experienced several of these, if not all of them, tried, tested, and knows that all of them have their flaws. No single one of them is perfect, and actually, whilst I think that there's a couple here that are really, really helpful when you're doing just software, but you're doing software that has like a real purpose, or it's adding, you know, it's answering part of a problem, or it's giving a solution to someone. It's far more direct and down the line. You haven't got the creativity element of it. And I think that throws a major spanner into the work when you're trying to follow a really, really rigid structure. So, controversially, I would say, you don't pick one, you just make your own up. You build your own system, you build your own approach. I know a lot of producers and project managers that would feel very uncomfortable about this, but I think it really is the only thing you can do to get something that works, because one size doesn't fit all. One thing is not always going to work for the organisation or the team setup you've got, and every single project is different as well. You can't assume that something that works for one is going to work for every subsequent one. So you've got to take the best bits of everything, take the parts of methodologies that you like from everywhere, make sure you communicate and build what you're trying to do based on your own personal knowledge from experience of what's worked, but also that of others, other team members. What do they know worked and what they didn't? Be really transparent about it, and like I say, always be aware that, you know, processes are always work in process until they're proven, and then be prepared for the fact that it isn't going to work forevermore. For that project it might be right, but for the next one you're pretty much going to have to start from scratch and build from scratch again. So when I joined Dlala, we were at a really pivotal point in the game where we were basically defining all of our sort of key mechanics. And what was clear is that there wasn't really any kind of process or approach to how we went about doing that. So one of the main things we had to do straight off the bat was go, okay, prototyping, how's it going to work for us on this project? So we put together a workflow which enabled sort of lots and lots of cross-collaboration with design and programming. We set up little teams who would be responsible for different types of mechanics based on concepts that had been brainstormed like studio-wide. And that's kind of how we decided to work going forward. We had a really kind of clear path about how things were iterated and when they were deemed to be signed off to move into production. What we also made sure we incorporated here was things that would help address issues that we knew existed already. So we'd known that level design were making quite a lot of implementation mistakes, which were causing quite a few errors. So we made sure that part of this process included them creating their implementation guides and recording all of the rules associated with that. So it was design rules as well as tech rules as well, and then that gave everybody a really clear picture of what was happening when they were able to do it. And we saw an immediate return on that. It was really, really good. Obviously, we changed our project progress tracker because we were basically going from nothing. I mean, they were kind of using Trello, but everything was out of date by the time I looked at it. We went with something called FreeCamp. It's relatively new, but really, really user-friendly, web-based solution, and it's got some really, really cool features, so check it out. You can buy into additional services, so it's got a bug tracker in there, so you can kind of consolidate everything. But the big thing that was, for us, really was the kind of daily digest, facility in there, which is basically a report that gets sent out every day to all of your people working on the project. And what we have is a standard protocol whereby every time somebody works on a task, they go and they click into the task, they leave their comments of what work's been done, what the next steps are, if they're roadblocked and by who, and, you know, key decisions made. We upload any documents that have been finalised and completed, and what happens is the next morning at 8 a.m, it gets posted out to everyone, and they can actually see kind of like a chronological account of everything that happened on the project the day before. So it's pretty good for kind of like facilitating conversations between people if they see something like, oh, what happened there? Or if even potentially, you know, they're thinking, oh, is that going to affect something I'm doing and we've missed it? So it's been really, really useful for that purpose. Yep, so like we said, we had no project budget, I mean, a lot of people may have really clever software to do this kind of stuff for you. And if you do, that's great. But again, I'm a big fan of kind of building what you need from scratch, because it makes life an awful lot easier going forward. And if you create things that are really flexible that you can apply to any project just by simply over-typing things and it automatically happens elsewhere, that's really, really helpful. But you need to be careful to make sure you're tracking your actuals against your commitments. Doing this sort of on a cost centre basis, so like your different categories of teams or whatever you might call it where you work, and having a real clear picture of those balances, and then looking also at the in-month and to the end of the project, what we've actually spent and the commitments going forward. Having something that very quickly flags it for you enables you to redistribute or take resource anywhere that you need to at a very, very early stage. So it's super important you have something like that. This is quite an obvious one really, but a very big priority for me was making sure that we built the communication channels and relationships with the people that we needed to get the game shipped. Obviously, again, the makeup of the project and who these people are and where they sit and the nature of your clients. Are they investors? Are you part investing in the project? Are they a conventional publisher? You know, what is the setup? It's going to be different. But you need to make sure that you really go all out to build those relationships with the people that are going to help get the game launched. If you don't have any of these things, it's going to make life very difficult. Which moves on to actually dealing with clients. And the idea behind this is really, it doesn't matter how small you feel, sort of in the big picture. I know I was quite intimidated by, you know, coming in and working with Disney and so on. That's me, the little red fish at the front. You've got to lead the charge. And with this, all I'm meaning is, you know, facilitate things by providing good, clean information. Make sure that you're tracking everything in some capacity. And what we made sure we had is, you know, a really, really clear production overview, just the same as anybody would do on sort of project management with reporting what we're doing. But what you're also making sure you're including in there is all the extra stuff you've done. You know, make sure that that's always brought to attention, that people are always aware of what additional things you've put in. And as well, tracking changes. Who has authorised the changes, when they happen. The last thing you want is 3 months down the line to have a situation where someone says, oh, where's this? And say, oh no, you said you didn't want that anymore 3 months ago. And not really having any kind of solid evidence that that's what was discussed. If you do things like that, you circulate them regularly to everyone who should see them, you should avoid things like that from happening. And again, just having, you know, good templates that you can work from that are going to help you moving forward, level overviews, things like this. These are multi-purpose. You're not just creating them for the client, they're useful for any external teams you work with, artists, QA. It provides a real kind of bible of information on the project right off the bat, which is going to make everybody's life a lot easier. Performance management. Don't want to talk about it too much because, like we say, it's sort of outside the scope of production, but it's just an awareness. Not every producer should go and write a performance management for like their company, but that's what I did because I thought after talking to AJ, you know, we really kind of needed something that gave a really clear picture of what everybody should be doing. It should just be simple. It doesn't have to be really complex or unnecessarily, and people shouldn't dread it. That's the biggest thing, right? Ours is really simple and it focuses a lot on the behaviours we're expecting, the proactivity, the kind of attitude that's not, well, I did think that, but it's not my job to say anything. It's that type of thing that we try to encourage in this. And what it also allows you to do as a business is you can kind of build your strategy around this. Are you thinking about you want to start maybe working in different engines or be cross-disciplined in that respect? Could you start actually setting up some kind of training, support and time for people along the way to actually achieve that in the long run? So, you know, it can prove quite a useful tool for everyone, especially if you can kind of connect it to kind of rewards and incentives, which we do at Dlala. So we were just about getting to the point where we had things kind of figured out and things were running smoothly. And then, yeah, sad times. So last year, obviously, Disney Interactive decided they were going to kill all of their console projects and move over back to the kind of licensing structure. So we were about 3.5, 4 months from launch, and we have a very, very pretty Disney game that will never see the light of day. But we didn't dwell on it. We took it as an opportunity to move forward as a company and as a business, because actually we'd financially structured the deal in a way that meant we could. which was great for us. So we decided it was time to get professional. We set up the studio very, very differently. We have 2 units where we are. So one's kind of like the unit we all work in, and the other one is kind of what you're seeing there, an area where we bring our clients, our potential clients, and it's also really great for our staff at lunch and after work and so on. We did a new website. We made sure that the company budget was up to standard of what our project budgeting now was doing as well. So we did that on a company-wide basis. And we also made sure all those policies that were missing were completed and done correctly. And we also made sure that we had sort of good operations management and got everything running nice and smoothly. On a games front, where are we at? Well, this is a little sort of sneaky preview as such, but on what we've been working on. We've been working on an original IP, a Dlala IP, and this is our lead character, Mush. So watch this space. Hopefully we'll be able to show everybody more about that very, very soon. And then after that, well, basically, we've got a few possibilities. We're talking to lots and lots of people. We're looking at working with existing IP again, and we're also speaking to some people about helping them launch new IP. So it's really, really exciting times for us. So not all was lost. The Disney deal did still provide us with an amazing opportunity going forward. So the original point that, I was basically trying to get to was, what is a game producer? And really, my conclusion is it's really whatever the studio and game needs it to be. And the role itself is really whatever the producer makes of it. At the end of the day, I think we'd be really, really naive to kind of like have this kind of little pocket of people that fall into kind of production roles and that kind of category. And I think there's multidisciplined people out there who have an awful lot to offer that can come in and kind of really help production, but also the business strategies and so on associated with your company too. So I think that that's something that we really need to be aware of, people that will assume responsibility and not avoid it, and really try and turn like concerns into opportunities as well. So thank you for listening to me kind of babble on endlessly. I hope you're all still awake. And if anybody has any questions, obviously I'd be happy to take them.
To what extent do you manage the team, or let the team manage themselves in this lubricated process?
So yeah, it's one that you kind of have to assess along the way. But basically we work to sprint still effectively. So we are sort of giving sort of an overarching, we need to achieve all of these things in the next 2 weeks. We work 2 weekly, and the teams need to do that as well. But I try to maintain a huge amount of contact with the leads and people in the team quite a lot, because we will find that things start to slip away and you kind of have to step in and kind of facilitate things to go forward. So you are kind of giving the freedom, but quite often as well, our guys are really, really good. If they're struggling with something or they know that something's proving to be an issue, they'll just come to me directly and say, this is what we've got, can you help us? Or this is what we got, can we have some more time, please? Whatever one it may fall into. No, definitely not.
All of us seem to come from some other role in life into the producer role.
Sure. I think, obviously, my own personal experience, I've only been with Dlala since November 2015, so I'm still relatively new to everything and sort of meeting other producers and finding out where they've come from. But a lot of them seem to have come from sort of QA-type backgrounds and software backgrounds predominantly, which obviously makes a lot of sense, because ultimately what you're trying to achieve is software. It's the complexities that come with it on the creativity front that I find to be most challenging.
I find that understanding people as individuals is a really key skill to producing as well.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I was once referred to sort of a master of manipulation in one of my previous jobs, which I didn't take too kindly to, but the point they were making was kind of being able to tap in and really getting people to realise the benefit to them in the long run of doing these certain things and approaching things a certain way. And it's really hard because it's not really something that can kind of be taught. It comes from experience, and obviously innately some people have that or not, but you're right, it's absolutely fundamental to getting the best out of the people that you have and also helping them realise the best that they have to offer.
And have you experienced crunch time? Because you mentioned it, but in the description of what you've done so far, did you have any crunch time?
No, I mean, we haven't really had to kind of impose anything. One of the really big things about working at Dlala, and obviously it is games, so it's different, is our guys are so fast. So much happens incredibly quickly, which is a blessing in some respects, and sometimes a bit of a nightmare to manage as well. But yeah, we've obviously had some times where obviously if we want to get to, we're looking at the kind of long-term development plan, and we're knowing we need to hit something. If it's basically decided, along this way we want to feel really confident about this level at this point or something, we sort of take an approach to people where we're not telling them they have to stay. We do it in a way that's like, oh guys, we'd really like to do this for this level today, can we all stay here? And they're very lucky because they get things like pizza, and we sort of make it all a bit of a fun thing as well, and we tend to get an awful lot out of them by taking that approach.
Yeah, me too. Have you now found the role that you think you'll stay in for the rest of your life, or are you going to move on?
Well, it's definitely the one I am enjoying most out of all of them, for sure. So yeah, no, it's been really, really nice to have the opportunity, which I probably wouldn't have had but for our chance encounter and knowing AJ. So yeah, no, I'm thrilled, and I'm hoping that I'll be around for a while.
You have to say that, your boss is sitting there. But thanks for the talk, it was a great talk.
Thank you, thanks.
On the list of requirements for a producer, you were only able to tick 2 of them. One of them being a passion for games, which at the start you didn't have. Since working with Dlala Games, has that changed now?
It definitely has. I mean, I haven't historically sort of never liked games. It was always intriguing to me. When I was younger, I really, really did. I had to say the Mega Drive, Nintendo 64, very much that kind of era. And actually, one of the big kinds of sells in terms of actually joining Dlala at the time was the nature of the game that we were working on. It was very in tune with what I'd loved as a child. And that definitely kind of rekindled everything. And yeah, now, like I say, I think what can be achieved through it is just astounding, and it's super satisfying seeing things come to life. So yeah, I find it really, really rewarding. Thank you very much, everybody. Obviously, if anybody would like to get in touch and so on, please come and speak to me. I've got business cards, and I really appreciate everybody coming. Thank you.